Hey everyone, welcome to the September 2022 meeting of Triangle Association of Freelancers. My name is Don Vaughan. Our guests this evening are Elaine Klonicki and novelist Jennifer Harrington, who writes as Jennifer Delamere. Elaine and Jennifer have worked together on a number of projects, and so Elaine is going to be in conversation with Jennifer about her creative journey, research, and a variety of other topics. So Elaine and Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Don. Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for agreeing to be interviewed again tonight. Yeah. You've been very forthright in sharing your publishing and writing journey, and we appreciate that because we all learn from your experience, and you've been very generous. So we're excited about talking about your newest book, called Holding the Line. It is set to be released on December 6th by Bethany House Publishing. So congratulations.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Another one out of the gate.
Number 9. I'm excited.
Oh my goodness. All right. So I want to talk for a minute about your initial expectations for romance writing, because this final book of your third trilogy is about female telegraph operators in the 1880s. I'm wondering, did you imagine when you were working on your very first book of the very first trilogy, An Heiress at Heart, that you would have this level of success as a romance writer? If I remember correctly, An Heiress at Heart wasn't even meant to be a trilogy, or you hadn't envisioned it that as a trilogy. Is that right?
That's right. I just had envisioned it as one book, and I wrote it, and I was very happy when I sold it. And then they told me, what else is in the series, or they asked me. And so I found a way to sort of sew 3 different books together with the same storyline, or with an overarching storyline.
That's pretty amazing. I wonder how typical that is.
I would think it probably is typical because, I just wrote a book to see if I could do it, I guess you would say. And I was very happy when it sold. I don't know how many people, I know a lot of people have to write to sell the first book. And I was very fortunate that I was able to sell that. I had some half-finished novels before then, but that was the first one I had completed.
Yeah. So did you ever imagine you'd be where you are today?
Well, I guess I had hoped this is where I would be today. I thought it would be good. I was interested in screenwriting, actually, in college. And I found out that there was a whole crop of romance writers out there that were using screenwriting techniques to write their novels in terms of how they put their storylines together. And so I thought that would be an interesting thing to do. And that's how I ended up getting into the novel writing. I met a bunch of novelists at a screenwriter workshop. This is where I always plug Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. That it's for screenwriting, but it will help you really, if you feel like you don't know where to start in writing a book, it will give you a good way to figure your way through a story.
Yeah, such a wonderful book. I really loved it, and you're the one who interested me in screenwriting, and I did finish a screenplay. I haven't gotten it out there anywhere yet, but I did finish it, and that book was just such a great help. Well, let's talk about your romance novels and your ideas. The Victorian era in England from 1837 to 1901 was noted for its technological innovation after the Industrial Revolution, and also science-based approaches to medicine. And it seems to be a popular one for romance novels. What drew you to that time period in particular? And also for this series, what drew you to write about telegraphy? Is that how you say it?
Telegraphy?
Yes, for this trilogy.
Well, I think a lot of romance novels, historical romance novels, are typically a little earlier in the Regency period. And I thought that period of time in the early 1800s had plenty of authors in that field. And I thought I should find a different way to break into it. And I always have been fascinated by the Victorian era because that is when their lives started changing in really amazing ways with the invention of the telegraph in the 1850s and 60s. And suddenly information was traveling all over the world like never before. Where have we heard that? And it upended their world just the way the internet did for us. And in fact, I read a book called The Victorian Internet, which was all about the history of the telegraph. And that kind of got me started on the quest for that. But I've always been interested in the historical and the Victorian time period. And my other books have other aspects of the Victorian time period, like railway travel, photography. I try to work these into my books because I find them so interesting. And I hope the reader does too.
Absolutely. I've always liked historical romance, but yours in particular, I think because you do so much research and of course are good at plotting stories, but the amount of time that you spend in particular on your research really shows in the books. And so I feel like I learned something that I didn't know and then also enjoyed the story. And to me, research is one of your strengths. Your father was a Navy pilot. You've shared on your website, and you've traveled a great deal in your life, including several trips to England to do the research, which I remember hearing about. Can you tell us anything in particular about your the specific research for Holding the Line, your newest book?
Well, for Holding the Line, I had already done a lot of research. The whole series deals with three friends who are all telegraph operators in different work situations, but they all run the telegraph. And so I had already done a whole lot of research for that. For Holding the Line, where I got to actually investigate Victorian tea shops, kind of like the precursors to a Panera, where you could go and get coffee or tea and a light meal, and it was acceptable for women to go there by themselves. And that is, there's several important scenes that take place in that tea shop. They had two in particular. They had a lion's, and then they had the other one where mine takes place. I'm drawing a blank right now. And I found pictures, I found articles about them, and I just thought it was really interesting because my books kind of deal with women who are pressing the boundaries just a little bit in terms of finding a career or finding something to actualize their talents, which is something that, again, was harder for women to do in earlier times. But when I went to London, I investigated London and some of the neighborhoods where my books take place. And I also went to Bristol, England, because my second series deals with three sisters who were raised in a famous orphanage that's located in Bristol. And the orphanage is closed down now, but the buildings are still there. They were purpose buildings. And this man operated these orphanages entirely by prayer and faith. He never asked for money, never asked for contributions, but the work just grew, and he was taking care of 5,000 children. And so the buildings are still there, and it was fun to go see it and to research the history and the area around there.
I bet that was so cool. And just being there has to just add a whole other flavor to your books that some other people might not have. Just to let everyone know, you might remember that Jennifer conducted a session at one of the Right Now conferences a few years ago, specifically about conducting research for fiction works. And I found it fascinating that she studies so many documents from a particular era and creates some storylines in her books based on events she's read about. Kind of as a special bonus to this interview, Jennifer's agreed to be sharing the handout from that session with our Google group. So look for that to come afterwards whenever she has a chance to do that. Let's switch gears and talk a minute about working with your editor at Bethany House. And as one of your first beta readers, you've shared with me some of the feedback you've gotten from your, I think, two editors there on some of your early drafts. And I was really surprised at how detailed they are. They gave you several pages of notes that discuss plot points, character issues, motivations, relationships, and the degree of emotions displayed by your characters, kind of all over the map. How do you feel about receiving so much feedback, or especially maybe how did you feel in the beginning? I would imagine it's both helpful and also daunting.
I guess it is both. Yeah, an 8-page editor memo telling you how great your book is and here's what we need you to change. But really, that it was all very helpful, and my editor was terrific, and she really got my books. She really understood what I was trying to do. She was helping me to clarify the storyline, or to make the characters a little clearer, more sympathetic, or just have stronger motivations. I think of it mostly as tweaking more than anything. It wasn't like a famous New Yorker cartoon I saw once where he said, we love everything in this book, every word, we just want you to put them in a different order. And, so it definitely was a help. I recommend, even if you're self-publishing, you should have a really professional editor look at your book and give you solid feedback. And having a beta reader, wonderful beta reader such as yourself, is great too. It's good to get feedback just from a reader point of view, what worked for them, what did not work for them.
Do you
So that
know
would be
from
my advice.
Okay, thanks. Do you know from talking to your author friends how common that level of feedback is? Is that sort of, normal case, or do you think that they, are even more involved in your book maybe than some publishing houses are?
They definitely are more involved. And my first trilogy was published with Hachette and Grand Central Publishing, and they were not as involved. They were kind of more harried, didn't have a lot of time to put into each individual book. So I really did see a difference when I moved over to Bethany House. So the publisher you're at will make a big difference. It's an important thing to try to ask and check out ahead of time if you can.
Thank you.
But I think that at Bethany House, they probably give every author that much feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was amazed at it. That's great. Let's talk about marketing support from your publisher. I've subscribed to your excellent newsletter, and I see the promotions that you do on Facebook, including giveaway contests. I was at one of your launch parties at the Tea Room in Raleigh, which was so much fun. What type of marketing does your publisher provide versus how much you're expected to do on your own?
Well, once again, I'm really happy to have the support of my publisher. They do a lot of marketing in terms of getting your name out to blogs, submitting your books to reviewers like Publishers Weekly, Library Journal. They also will do Facebook ads, and they will do, try to help you cross promote. There is also a giveaway page that anyone can join on Facebook where they will promote any author of their authors who are doing giveaways. That being said, even with an excellent publisher that I have, a lot of weight is still on the author to do the social media, to do the newsletter. I mean, that's totally on my dime, and websites, marketing, as much as I can do on a personal basis. So that is for the author to do. Sometimes also the authors have to pay for their swag, bookmarks, postcards. My publisher pays for that, which I'm very thankful for, and does the design also. So you will have to put in your own money, generally speaking, to help get the word out about your books.
Well, and you do a lot. You do a great job, and it sounds like they do more than some publishers do. So that's great. Let's talk a little bit about sales and reporting. If you want to share, did you get advances on all of your books, plus a percentage of sales, or?
I did. I got advances on all my books. That most traditional publishers will work that way. Some of the smaller ones might have smaller advances or a different setup. And most publishers these days, I mean, you just take your advance. A very seasoned author who was a good friend of mine shared with me that you just expect that advance will be what you earn on the book, and you don't get any royalties until you've sold enough books to earn out or to pay that advance. So you can't really count on that. And anything else then you just think of as gravy, I guess. Anyway, that's the way I'm working right now. I have had some of my books that have earned out and some that have not.
Interesting. How often do you get sales reporting? How much information do you get?
Well, you can go on Amazon as an author and see a certain level of how your books are doing based on the book scan, which isn't a complete record, but it gives you an idea if your books are selling. If you are a self-published author, you'll have a lot more of that kind of immediate feedback, which I don't have. So in a lot of ways, I'm waiting until 6 months later when I get my royalty statement to see how I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at the Author Central on Amazon at least gives me a feel for what's going on.
Gotcha. Are you able, is that helpful? Are you able to track whether any particular marketing efforts, either by your publisher or yourself, have worked, have had an impact?
I need to get a little more better at that. I think there are ways to track that, I think, although it still seems rather nebulous to me. I think a lot of self-published authors have a better handle on the marketing thing because they're more responsible for it. But that's one area that I definitely want to grow in.
You mentioned to me that your publisher doesn't want to offer you another contract until they see how the sales for Holding the Line are going and whether your sales in general pick up. You said that sometimes that it happens that when a series is complete, some readers wait and read a whole series at once. So, you know, then they get sort of a boost in sales, I guess, at that point. Does your publisher give you an idea of what the threshold is you're supposed to reach, or they just give you a yes or no at some point?
No, they didn't really give me a threshold. But I know that there are a number of authors that they're kind of, because the market is really very, very tight right now, the number of self-publishing books, as we know, has exploded. And so there's plenty of offerings out there. It's harder to get heard or kind of to rise above the fray.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are finding great success doing that on social media. So mostly, I think, I don't know exactly what the threshold will be. So I guess I am a little bit in the dark there. But I am aware of other authors that have kind of in this position and were still picked up for a new series. So if that doesn't work, I've got plenty of ideas and plenty of ideas of where to sell them. So
you always do.
When I first entered the writing world and was taking workshops, you know, all the very seasoned authors with dozens of books under their belt said, it's never continuous. There's always ups and downs.
Mm-hmm.
You may change publishers or editors, but it's really funny when I see my editor with other authors, it almost feels like, you know, an ex, you know, they're off, they're moving along with other people. And I'm like, wait.
That must be a strange
every
feeling.
editor has, you know, a number of books, authors that they work with. So,
yeah. You mentioned a new trend you've seen with your publisher where the quote new authors they've been signing are actually seasoned authors that either have done very well in self-publishing or were well published with another company. In both cases, they already have name recognition and have proved their marketing prowess. It makes sense, but what does that mean, or do you know, for truly first-time authors?
Well, I guess it's good and bad news, really. It's a trend that I just have seen with my publisher, and I'm assuming it may be at others as well. When self-publishing first kind of took off around 2010 or 2011, there was a lot of people saying, well, you know, this is a good way to get seen by a publisher and maybe they'll pick you up. And I remember being sort of part of the crowd that wasn't convinced that was really the case. And yet this is, in the last year and a half or so, all of my publishers have picked up these authors that were either very successful self-publishing, and clearly they have good quality work as well, or they worked with another publisher. So I don't know what this means for a first-time author. It almost kind of reminds me of Hollywood, where they only want to go with established, if you're already a best-selling novelist or if you're part of a franchise, that it's easier to get a movie made. So I would hope that there's still room for new authors to rise up. That, I guess, would depend on having a good agent as well to help you kind of get your name out there.
Yeah. Do you want to tell the story real quick about how you found your agent and first publisher on Twitter?
Yeah. I went to a Romance Writers of America conference in New York, and there was an agent that I wanted to talk to, but I could not get a meeting with her because all of her meeting slots were full. And so I just happened to mention on Twitter that I had this book and that I had wished I had been able to talk to her, and she saw it and contacted me, or I just told me to follow up with a proposal, which I did, a proper query letter and all of that. And she read the query and asked for the manuscript, and read the manuscript and decided to offer representation. And when I accepted, then she tweeted out that she had just picked up this new Christian historical romance author, and an editor from Grand Central saw it and contacted her and said, well, can I see that book? So that's how I ended up selling it to Grand Central. So yeah, it was a match made on Twitter.
Yeah, that's very cool. And that was a long time ago too.
2011.
Early days of Twitter.
Probably now it would be Instagram. I don't know.
Yeah, hard to say. TikTok. I've heard you say on occasion, and probably right at the very end of finishing one of your books, that you get tired sometimes of writing on a deadline. Are you considering switching to screenwriting, which I know you've been dabbling with, since college, or do you know what's next for your writing career?
I think that I have a project that I'm going to switch time periods. I'm become really fascinated with the 1920s and the kind of interwar period. World War II, I know, is very big right now among novelists, but I'm kind of more interested in World War I and the aftermath of that for people, the lost generation and all that. And also that was the age of great transatlantic ships. And so I did read a book called Maiden Voyages, which was about women who worked and traveled on the ships in the early 1900s, until around 1950s. And that got me interested in that. But also, screenplays are a possibility because there are more movies being made now that are outside Hollywood. And so I think there would be, I have an idea for some openings where they might enjoy the kind of story I would write. They would be contemporary. And that was kind of my initial love. So I think that really the field is wide open. I just have to explore and see what it is. And I think that's what every author, you find out what you're good at, what your passion is, and then just start exploring and looking for those open doors. Write the book you want to read, as I often say. That was great advice that I received years ago.
Sounds like you've received a lot of good advice and, taken it to heart and made use of the advice that you've received. I've heard you share a lot of lessons with, with other authors about advice that you received that you followed up on.
Yeah, for many years, I was a member of Romance Writers of America, and I learned a lot from that organization about the craft of writing and about selling and marketing and the business of writing. And I love being a part of TAF because collectively we know everything here in TAF, or we know someone who knows. I've just noticed people will randomly post, oh, does anybody know about X, Y, and Z? You know, and one or two people will say, oh, I know someone. And I just think that that's fascinating. To me, it's a really an example of a handful of people know the world. So it is a tremendous group.
My funny story about that one is Anita Stone one time was writing, I don't even know what the magazine was, but somehow she had pitched a story on donkeys and needed to know if anyone knew anyone who had donkeys. And my brother happened to have 5 donkeys and had many hysterical stories about donkeys. So she went up there, interviewed them, met the donkeys, and did maybe 1 or 2 stories about the donkeys. So there's proof that works with our group.
For example, I'll just toss this out right now. I have my father's pilot logs from the early 1950s when he was in the Navy flying in and around Trinidad. And I have no idea what to do with them. So if anyone has any idea of a museum or a researcher that could use these pilot logs from the 1950s and into the 1960s, please let me know. Just throw that in.
Library of Congress might be interested, Jennifer. Seriously.
I could contact them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting. What a lot of people probably don't know about you is that you work, or have for the most part, worked a full-time job as an editor of, I think it's educational testing materials. The entire time you've been writing your novels, it takes an extraordinary level of discipline to do both jobs. What motivates you, and how do you do that?
The deadline. That's what it comes down to. No, I think I consistently, I want to grow my writing to be a full-time thing so that I would not have to do the day job, as we say. But I also have a lot of latitude at my day job, and I was able to cut back my hours. And so I'm thankful for that. It is very hard to do. It takes some real good time management. It's not easy. And I think every now and then I would just get sort of worn out and have to take a step back. So that is in a way what I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm.
Take a step back and assess where you are at before you move forward. And I have some personal family issues that I'm having to deal with, and taking care of aging family members and such. And so different seasons of life require different focus.
Yep, that's for sure. A lot of us have been there.
This last Sunday, I felt really odd, like I should be in a coffee shop writing, because Sunday afternoons, that was so often, where I'm at. And it sort of felt weird just to have something else I had to do instead. So I get writer withdrawals.
Yeah. What impressed me a lot is, I think you said that sometimes you would stop at a coffee shop on your way home from work, from having worked all day, and write for a couple hours before you went home. And that's a lot of dedication right there.
A lot of my books were written at Panera or at the North Regional Library Quiet Room. I was so happy to discover that they did not take away the Quiet Room when they remodeled. So I'll be back.
Oh, good to know. Yeah, a lot of authors use that one, and a lot of authors don't know about those. So they have ones that you can reserve for a certain time slot, and it's just a little area with nothing in it but a desk that you can just go and have quiet space and write.
Their Quiet Room, they did remodel it slightly, so there's even some comfortable chairs to sit in.
Huh?
You don't like the idea of sitting in a hard chair. They have a couple chairs in the Quiet Room, so I look forward to testing those out sometime.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're going to open it up to the audience in a minute for some questions that they might have, but I wanted to say that to the audience, if we piqued your interest here tonight, you can find out more about Jennifer on her website at jenniferdelamere.com. And her extras tab in particular, I found, has a lot more information about her writing process, and it's just a fascinating read. There's just page after page about how she came to writing. Her mother was a writer, just a lot of history, and then about the different books and kind of how they how they came about, that everyone might enjoy. So I wanted to wish you best of luck with your sales on the trilogy and with your new book. And I can't wait to read the final product. I always get to read a preview. I feel so special that I get to read a preview and then I get to read the final product. It's always very exciting. I think Don has a question for you about
Actually,
your
several.
pseudonym and how that came about. And then Don, if you'll field the rest of the questions for me, I did something on my screen where I actually can't see everyone anymore.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
I
I will
did.
do my best. First of all, Jennifer, can people subscribe to your newsletter through your website?
Yes, definitely.
I want to mention
I'm doing book giveaways every month now. So.
Oh, terrific. I'm glad you mentioned the newsletter because Jane Friedman, who's a writing coach, a lot of people familiar with her, did a session about that in New York, about the value of author newsletters like that. And they really are a helpful promotional tool. So I hope everyone will check out yours on your website. I had two questions to start. I was curious what it is about the genre in which you write that fascinates you so. What is it about this particular literary genre that attracts you as a writer?
Well, primarily, I'm a history geek. I prefer reading history books over fiction for the most part, since I'm a fiction writer. And so that drew me to historical fiction. And as far as romance, I do like the happy endings. I grew up just totally enamored with romantic comedies, movies, which I still am. So it's kind of a good combination of those two things.
I was curious why you write under a pseudonym.
Well, that just happened because when I got picked up by Grand Central, they had an author named Jennifer Haymore, and they thought the name sounded kind of rather too similar. So I changed to the pseudonym of Delamere instead. It's not a secret, my name, because you can find it on the copyright page of all my books. But that's how I ended up with the pseudonym.
Elaine talked to you earlier about being a beta reader. And could you talk a little bit about the value of beta readers? And could you give us a very specific example of something Elaine may have commented on as a beta reader that you took to heart and incorporated into your work?
Ooh, I'd have to think about that one. There have been many. And it's because an editor will look at it from an editor's eye and be thinking about plot and structure and character motivation and that kind of thing. And a reader will just tell you, oh, I didn't like that person, or I didn't understand this scene, or I didn't think this worked, or I didn't believe that aspect of the plot. And that sort of gives you a feel or a preview. It's like doing a test screening to see how a reader might react to it. I think in Elaine, I have taken so much of Elaine's advice. I can't think of a specific one though, but I think in terms of the things that she wanted to see more of or thought weren't quite working, I tried to change.
I think I could think of a few. I think there was one where a girl didn't seem to have enough girlfriends that would demonstrate her personality, or she didn't have enough depth or something. And I thought maybe giving her a closer friendship with somebody might help. There was one where you had quite several times, I think, where you had deleted several scenes, sort of not realizing there was some piece of information that the reader needed to know. And so there was one where a guy sort of came to religion through some trauma he went to or something. But he was kind of a rascal to start with, and as the reader, that scene where the conversion scene got dropped. And so we didn't understand how suddenly, this rascal of a guy has suddenly come to religion. I was like, where'd this come from? And you're like, oh, whoops, I dropped that section. So those kinds of things where, something about somebody's motivation I wouldn't understand, or a lot of times it had to do with the level of, I have a psychology background, so I always wanted a little deeper understanding of the emotion or feeling that a character was going through. I just asked all my questions that I had, and she would be like, "Oh, okay," and she just right away, and then And then I would, we wouldn't talk anymore about it until I got to see the final book. So that's what's fun about being a beta reader. If you've never done that and you want to volunteer or anyone asks you to do it, it's so fun because you get sort of the inside track a little bit. You get to be on the inside a little bit, and then you get to see the final product. It's just fun.
And lastly, Jennifer, career-wise, you've put most of your focus on long-form fiction with your novels. I was wondering if you had ever considered short fiction, short stories, perhaps set in the milieu that you specialize in, but have you ever been attracted to short fiction personally? Is that something you would pursue?
I wish I could write short fiction. It takes a different mindset, I think, and you have to work harder at it. Does everybody know Mark Twain's famous line? I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. That I really admire short fiction. I'm actually reading a book of short stories right now by Jack Finney of Time and Again fame, and also Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Good stuff.
And so I'm reading a book of his that deals with time travel and such, because that's always been a favorite of mine. So I have thought about it, but I think it does require a different skill set. You have to kind of jump into a story that's already underway.
That's a good word. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Jennifer? Jenny? And you're muted. There you go.
Yeah. Jennifer, I was curious about, just to know a little bit more about your research. You mentioned the trips to London, and I'm wondering how much preparation you did beforehand, and how did you know what you wanted to learn when you got there? And did you have someone in mind that you met with who helped you, and what exactly were you looking for? Were you trying to get more specific information, or were you getting just a general feel for the area and the architecture and the topography? If you could talk just a little bit about the travel aspect of research, I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to be to feel what it was like to be in London, to see those actual buildings where things took place, or Hyde Park, where so many things happened, especially in my first series, and and again in Bristol, to actually see the buildings, to talk to the curator of the museum there. He gave me some specifics about life in that orphanage that I mentioned in my books, even though my books don't take place in the orphanage. They were things that informed the characters' backgrounds and that I would mention in my books from time to time. And in London, I didn't have a specific person, but I did a lot of research, and I had in mind the neighborhoods I wanted to visit, the buildings I wanted to go to, especially, for instance, the courts of justice, because I have a lawyer in my book, The Heart's Appeal, and that was just built around the time that my book takes place. And so I took a walking tour of that area and learned about some of the legal aspects of London. So the professionals I talked to were basically some of these tour guides that could focus on specific things. There was a couple house museums that I toured. There was one I wanted to tour that was closed for renovation. But that gave me a feel for the furnishings and just the life of the time. And so I just did a lot of that kind of thing I had in my mind to feel what it would be like to walk from here to there, or to the sights and the sounds.
Joel, you said you had a research question, or did Jennifer just answer that for you?
No, I had just a research suggestion. You can think it's self-serving, but since I write a history blog of mid-19th, I'm familiar with telegraphy, phonography, in fact, and a whole bunch of things. And so, if with Paraguay and how to sit in a hoop skirt, you'll find at least 50-something entries on everything from Santa Anna inventing chewing gum to the Know-Nothings and the Plug Uglies creating a riot in Washington, D.C. in 1815.
Oh yeah,
Um,
I'm sure I'd
all
find that
kinds of
really
stuff. I figure if it's off the wall, there's another one I think people like is called Another Girl in Pants. About women who were arrested for, quote, wearing pants, which we wouldn't even recognize as pants nowadays.
Yeah, I've had a lot
All
of
kinds
fun.
of off the wall stuff. What I do is I plunder the Library of Congress and a couple of other places, just reading almost at random bunches of newspapers from the time. And that's given me a great background in understanding what the language of the time means, because I can see clear words used then don't mean what they mean now. A great example would be refugee, which used to mean white upper class people who would go to visit relatives when a disaster hit, like plague or storm. They would never dream
I
of
do that too. I have a subscription to the British Newspaper Archive,
yeah.
and
That's exactly what you need to do.
that for plot points.
Yeah, I do it with the American one, because you'll come across stuff like Lincoln's quoted as saying, "I'd rather swallow my buckhorn chair." And everybody evidently at the time reading that would have understood what he was talking about. I had to go look it up. But anyway, that's just my suggestion. Is the Library of Congress has got this tax machine. It's great to use, fascinating. I'd seldom open a newspaper at random. I don't learn something astonishing, like the United States almost went to war with Paraguay in 1858. So that's just simply my suggestion to anybody doing some research, is try the Library of Congress newspapers.
Cool.
That's very good. That's probably free too, because I have to pay for the British Newspaper Archive.
No, the Library of Congress is free, and you can get all your illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
They're free, which is what screen capture some of the illustrations I put with the blog entries. And so you're not worried about using somebody's copyrighted stuff. And one of the great romance things I think you might be interested in is the marriage of Fanny Kimball with the richest man in America, named Pierce. And she wrote, he was the biggest slave owner, and she didn't know how he made his money until after they were married.
Oh.
And that did not turn out well.
No, I imagine not.
Does anyone else have any questions for Jen? No? Okay, Jennifer,
I'm going
thank
to
you.
type in my site suggestion.
Cool. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you very much.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us this evening. This was fascinating. I really, really appreciate it. And I wish you the best of luck with your new book. I hope it leads to another series for you. That would be awesome.
Thank you. And if anybody has questions at all, you can always contact me through my website, and I'm happy to answer them. So,
and I just put up the link for the blog.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I see that Michael has joined us. Michael, I hope the kids did well in their swimming class. Michael has talked about it.
They did, and thank you for your patience. And again, I told you this privately, Don, but I'm rarely in these meetings because 7 p.m. when you have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old is a rough time. But I watch almost all the meetings, and I appreciate everything that.
Well, we understand completely, dude, and we really appreciate you joining us tonight. But I wanted Michael to join us this evening because he's mentioned in passing on the board about his most recent sale to Wired magazine, which has kind of an interesting backstory. So, Michael, before we talk about that, refresh our memory about what this article was about, and tell us a little bit about where this idea came from for you.
Yeah, so the story was about about how during the fall of Kabul, a bunch of Joes and Janes regular Joes and Janes, some many military, many not military, kind of got together and used a bunch of very pedestrian, very civilian means to come together to work to save the lives of, now at this point, thousands of Afghans. And when I say civilian means, I mean like they were using Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, Snapchat, Slack, anything they could communicate. And in doing so, these two different factions formed. One was called Team America, one was called Task Force Dunkirk. And they were, Team America was run by a former a veteran, and but comprised of his wife, his high school teacher, his friends, his soccer coach, like just whoever wanted to help. Whereas Task Force Dunkirk was comprised of mostly retired, very high-ranking military and intelligence people. And they kind of came together, and basically what happened was a lot of the Dunkirk people, their connections were almost too high because they had gotten so far in their careers and in the ranks in the military and the CIA and the NSA, et cetera, that they didn't have contact. They no longer had contacts on the ground. I mean, again, imagine it like an editor-in-chief to a freelancer. An editor-in-chief is not going to talk to the freelancer. He is going, or her, I should say, they are going to talk to their editors, their deputy editors, who are then going to talk to their section editors, who are then going to talk to the writers. So these people, one of whom was described to me as like a Joe Montana of the intelligence world, to use a sports reference, they then, with their connections being so high, they realized they needed people who had connections on the ground. And what was really interesting to me was that the one thing I know I'm not military, but the one thing I know that's beaten into their heads from the minute they signed the military papers to join whatever branch is chain of command. There are a few things more important in the military than chain of command. And what was really interesting about this whole story is that Task Force Dunkirk completely abandoned. Now, these people were retired. They can't get in trouble for abandoning chain of command. It was more of a cultural thing, but they completely abandoned chain of command and started listening and taking orders from these much younger, much junior ranking captains. Meanwhile, they had, lieutenant colonels and majors, and they were like, what do you people need us to do? Because you people are digital natives and we are not. We are older. We are in our 40s, 50s, 60s. You know how to use Slack. We don't. So there was all these different elements of the chain of command, the tech, but mostly and most importantly, it was just a human story of people trying to help people. Because what happened was, as I'm sure you all saw over the last few weeks of August this year, especially, we abandoned thousands of people who helped keep our people very much alive over the last 20 years. And these people said, excuse my language, but fuck that. Like, we can't just abandon these people, even though the State Department is saying, only Americans, everybody else, good luck, you're on your own. So that's kind of the story in 1,000 words.
But how did this become your story, Michael? How did this story land on your desk? You thought it was worth pursuing. Where did the idea come from?
So several years ago, I started editing as a side gig. There's a brand out of Durham. Well, now they're remote, but they were out of Durham, called Sofleet. And that word is a portmanteau of athlete and special operations forces, SOF. So Green Berets, Force Recon Marines, they all refer to themselves as SOF guys, Special Operations Forces, so Sofleet. And basically it's a human performance brand that anyone here can go and log on and sign up for a workout program, nutrition program. And so they needed a copy editor. So I was working with them, and through that I became friends with a lot of these guys. And because we're so close to Fort Bragg, a lot of them live in our area now. And so a lot of people I became friends with over the last couple of years have been these special operators. And when this was happening, I saw a lot of them spring into action. And as it was happening in real time on Facebook and on Twitter, and I reached out to a couple of them, and I said, what can I do to help? Like, it wasn't a story. It was like, how can I help you help to do whatever you're doing. And my buddy Worth, who was one of the main subjects of the story, he was a Marine Raider, which is like the Marines version of their special ops, Green Berets, Navy SEALs. The Marines have what's called Raiders. And he said he's a writer. He's since retired. Oh, I'm sorry. Another very fun element of the story is that Worth, before this all went down, 45 days before this all went down, Worth Parker retired from a 27-year career in the Marines. So it was almost like a bad sitcom where it's like the cop who just retired. And so Worth's, since he's retired, he's become a writer himself. And he said, tell the story. That's how you can help. So go tell our story and evangelize for us. And that's what I tried to do. So before I go down that wormhole, I'll let Don ask his next
Well,
question.
let's go down that wormhole, because you told me that Wired was not your first market to approach with this. And I think you mentioned you had actually at one point reached out to Esquire, if I recall correctly, Esquire or GQ, I forget. So
Both.
who was the first, and how did these not take this awesome story?
I don't know. Well, I do know. I think I have an idea. So I reached out. Yeah. So I think my first one. So what I do is, I have my pitches it all exists on an Excel spreadsheet, and in the columns is the story ideas, and then row by row by row, each row going out from it is where I want to pitch it. And I start with the biggest fish in the sea, and then it goes down as it gets further and further along. So with this one, it was probably like pie in the sky, like New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, GQ, Esquire, the Atlantic, whoever. I pitched it to all those folks while this was happening last year. And so one thing that Task Force Dunkirk was doing was each of the people, whatever their skills were, they kind of took on that role. And Worth, since Worth was a writer, they made him their quote unquote minister of information. And so he was doing a great job getting the word out. And so Task Force Dunkirk and Team America last August, while the operation was going on to evacuate Kabul between August 15th and August 31st, is kind of the timeline. Worth was getting their work in New York Times, in ABC News and CNN, in right-wing stuff, Newsmax and OAN, which led to a whole other issue with them. But he didn't know at the time. He was just like, pitch it, get it out, whoever wants to write about us, because these people were all operating on volunteer hours. So for him to evangelize about it and for him to potentially get people to not only come help, but potentially donate money, whatever. And so I think that's what scared a lot of editors off, even though I made it abundantly clear no one is writing this as a feature. This is all news, and it is well covered. And if you Google it, there were at the time, God, I don't know, dozens of stories, but they were all news stories. And I said, I have the access, I have the connections, I have the insider, info to tell this story as a feature. And everyone passed. GQ, I came very close with. So what happens is, and I'm sure some of you know, but for those who don't know, with magazines of that kind of ilk, it's not the editor who says yes to you. It's the editor who says yes to you, then who has to turn around and go sell it to their editorial board. So just because an editor buys your pitch means nothing. And the same happened with Wired, because Wired is a Condé Nast publication. It's a big magazine. So what happened with GQ was the editor I pitched was into it, couldn't get it past his editorial board. I never found out why, but I'm assuming it's because Worth did such a good job of getting his work out there. And again, it was news. It wasn't feature. And I guess for whatever reason, I couldn't sell it last August.
How did you interest Wired in this? Did you kind of restructure your approach to this story for them?
Totally.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
So what happened was, after it didn't get sold, I decided to put it away and revisit it next, June or May or April, and then reposition it around the 1-year anniversary. And so put it away. And then went back to a lot of those publications, and a lot of them still were not interested. And then Wired, yeah, I thought, you know what, and this goes for any pitch to any magazine. You have to make your pitches fluid so that they can, not every story is a tech story, or not every story is a military story, or whatever. Again, at its core, it is very much a human story about people helping people, but the window dressing was different for who I was pitching it to. And then, yeah, so for when I thought, you know what, maybe let me try Wired, I kind of dug into what I had known more, what I had pre-researched, and realized, hey, like, they're using WhatsApp, they're using FaceTime. And so how do we kind of pivot it and position it around making that kind of the narrative hook for Wired? And it should be very much noted that the editor helped me do that. I took it, to use another sports analogy, I took it from, home plate to second base. And when I pitched it to Zach, who was my editor at Wired, I was on second base. And then Zach helped me take it from second base to home, and saying, all right, I get what you're saying, but here's what we need to do for me to sell it to my editorial board. And that was very much more digging into the tech, digging into the QR codes that they used, but even the anti-tech, like the near recognition signals, which is a technology dating back from, World War II, I believe, or maybe even earlier than that, when it's like, wear a red feather, and that's how I know that you're a good guy, or wear a gold watch, or whatever. So not only was it high tech, but it was very low tech. And so Zach helped me. Like I said, I took it the second, and then he helped me shape the pitch and take it to home. His editors bought it. Crazy side note story is that it went weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. I think I pitched it to him in like March, and it went weeks, and he was like, I love it. I think I could sell it to my editors. And I kept, hey, what's up? Where's this at? What are we doing? What are we doing? Finally, I had to threaten to kind of pull it. And then he was like, I'll get you an answer by the end of this week. He got me an answer by the end of that week. He said, great, we want it. Can you get us a first draft by June 29th? And it was, I believe, June 1st. The only problem was my wife and I were taking our kids to Europe for 2 weeks in the middle of June. So I reported and wrote a 10,000 word first draft with 25 sources thereabouts in 1 week. And it was the most insane week of my entire life. But yeah, it was nuts, absolutely bonkers, like the craziest thing I've ever done in my life. But yeah, yeah, it was really kind of an odyssey of like, how do I make this thing, because my job, and there are certain stories where I believe I'm not going to jump through hoops, and I'm not going to take this story and make it what it isn't, to tell it, because in doing that, the story may lose a lot of its integrity. But with this story, my only goal, my end game, was to tell this story. So I didn't care what the window dressing was. If Wired wanted me to make it about tech, I don't know. I can barely turn my iPhone on and off. I am a Luddite. I am not a tech I don't read Wired. I don't. And but for me, it was how do I tell this story and tell the story of this amazing work that these people did. So yeah.
Well, looking back on this whole experience, Michael, what's the takeaway? What's the lesson learned from this particular project for you as a writer and as a journalist?
Don't hem yourself in. Don't think of this as, so now, fingers crossed, I'm talking to a couple of potential agents to maybe sell this as a book. And one of the agents I recently talked to that I really liked and hope maybe we work together she said, this has to be a human story. And I said, it is a human story. I think you're, I think you're missing a bit of the point here. Like, this is not, and so, for me, that was the most important part, to be able to tell a story about people, helping people that they didn't know, that they may never know, that might not survive, and so it was really about patience and staying with an idea, but it was more importantly, it was about getting myself out of my own preconceptions and learning and teaching myself how to make a square peg not fit into a round hole, but to shape the square peg into a round object so that it fits into the hole. Which I think is a small distinction in the analogy, but I think an important one. I wasn't trying to jam this thing in. I was saying, hey, how do I make this thing what it needs to be to fit into this paradigm to reach this audience. And so that was the kind of the big, more theoretical thing. The smaller thing was I've never done anything of this magnitude. I mean, I've written plenty of 1,200, 2,000, 3,000 word pieces, and this ended up being just under 7,000 words. But I've never done anything of this magnitude, and so learning how to tell a story over that, that big of a story, learning how to identify what to say, what to tell, and what not. Because for every single story we told, there was a dozen others we could have told that we didn't. But how do we pick those? And in the end, it was the very simple question, like, does it serve the story? And if some of them didn't. Some of them we thought we could include them, but in the end it was like, are we just including this to be sensationalist because this person slept in a sewage canal for 3 weeks, which is horrible, and that person's story completely deserves to be told. But in a way, it found like sometimes we were trying to wedge it in because those stories were so sensationalist. But really it was like you said, I mean, it was more about the pitching, and it was more about and it made me go back and look at a lot of my other stories and say, okay, cool. How else can I shift this concept to make it fit somewhere? And not everything can be, but a lot of things can be, I think.
Michael,
Yeah.
Can I ask you what rights were sold and how much Wired pays for features like this?
I got paid $12,000 for this story. So $2 a word, which is far and away the most I've ever gotten. I mean, it was a great rate per word, and B, it was a long story. But when you reel it back, it's like, wow, oh my God, it's 12,000, for one story. But it also took me 3 months of nonstop work to do.
You earned every one of those $12,000.
Right. So when you kind of think of it that way, it's actually not. I mean, it's amazing money. Don't get me wrong, but if you break it down to be a quarter of a year, that's really not. It's not that much money. So yeah, it was $2 a word. And yeah, again, when I saw him send me that and the proposed word count, I had to like lift my jaw up off the floor. And
Is
then
this also open? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
What was your other
right.
question?
So I was curious what rights they acquired for this particular project.
So what happens with a lot of these cats is it's the same with when I contribute to the New York Times, they'll come at you and they will ask you for everything. And because people are going to sign a contract that gives them everything. But not with this, I didn't do that. With other stories that I don't have time to negotiate, that I don't have the money. Like if I'm getting paid $1,200 for a story, I'm not going to pay my lawyer $400 to negotiate movie rights when I know the story is not going to be made into a movie. I don't know that. You never know. But it's, so it's kind of that like following your nose in that sense of like, can this thing be bigger? So obviously the first thing I did with this story was call my lawyer and said, get me whatever you can. And what I learned from talking to a lot of, and I called a lot of other writers, a lot of other magazine writers, feature writers, friends of mine who write for the Times Magazine, who write for GQ. And I asked, what should I ask for? And they said, ask for half of everything. And sure enough, there was no negotiation. They said, okay, sure. But they send you that initial contract because they know some knucklehead is going to say, okay, sure. And again, it's for me, it's a, okay, is this story has a lot of potential for film and TV, for book. But a lot of the other stuff I do has very little potential and it doesn't pay nearly as much. So again, it's kind of like a weighing, do I want to have my lawyer negotiate on my behalf? And there are other times where I just ask, hey, like I want, but once TV and movie rights started getting involved, that's a world I don't understand, because you get paid one fee if it's optioned, and then if it's made, you get paid something else, and then if it's turns into a series, you get paid something else. If it's a movie, you get paid one thing, but if it's a documentary, you get paid another. And that was just like, I don't like, it's more than me saying I want half of whatever if this is turned, but they were totally cool with it. They again, it's just more on their part of, because someone is going to say so yeah. And Condé Nast, Wired's parent company, they have an in-house team that is currently pitching it for TV and movie. Fingers crossed. We've had a couple of kind of interested parties, but we've passed because they wanted to make a guns and explosions movie, and this is not that. This is very much not that, and both myself and the two main subjects in the story were kind of all on the same page. Like, I don't, unless it would have to be a lot of money, which it probably would have been, but at the same time, it's like, it's not. I don't. If it were fiction, whatever, I don't care. Pay me whatever and do it. But these are real people. So for me, it was important to kind of say, like, no, that's not what this is. And then book rights. They're pitching, but also I'm allowed to kind of pursue it on my own. If they find someone who's interested, they get a small percentage of the advance. But
I'm really glad you mentioned how you negotiated the right situation. I think you're right. I think the majority of writers would have just been ecstatic to be in Wired for that rate and would have signed anything for that opportunity. So your story is really insightful in encouraging people to stand up for themselves. And a lot of beginning writers tend to not do that. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be that troublesome writer of asking questions and trying to stand up for themselves. But as I keep saying, no one else will do that for us. We have to do it for ourselves. And your story is an amazing example of that. And just an amazing story to go with.
And also just to realize that, they're expecting you to come back, just as, one thing I always tell writers who are getting started too is like, I don't want to cold pitch an editor. 99.9% of editors in the world, they expect to be cold pitched. Mm-hmm. They want to be cold pitched because if there's a great story out there, they want it. And so with this is the same thing. Like they expect you to come back and say, and if they can't do it, they'll tell you. If someone offers me 50 cents a word, I say, I want $1 a word or 75 cents a word. And they say 50 cents is the best we can offer. They're being honest with me. It's not, well, I think they're being honest with me, but yeah, so no one expects you to say, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so they expect you to negotiate. Does anyone have any questions for Michael about this particular experience, his experience with Wired? I'm really glad we brought you in. This to me is an amazing story, an amazing success story for you as a writer. I'm really, really happy for you. But all the machinations and everything that went into making this a reality was really revealing and insightful, and I appreciate that. Oh, Allison, do you have a question?
Hi, congratulations, Michael.
Thank
awesome.
you.
Love the story. Hey, I just have a question. I'm a pitch hater. So when you said you went through a list pitching, did you pitch them simultaneously? And then I have another question after that. Did you pitch them simultaneously? And did you hear back from each one that you pitched? Did you get a
Yeah.
an
Yes, I
answer?
did. Yes, I did, and no, I didn't. I always
Okay.
pitch. I always
Yeah.
pitch simultaneously. I know editors don't. Some editors don't like that. I'm always open about it. I say, hey, this is going. Especially when something like this that's happening in real time. I mean,
Right.
I was pitching this as Kabul was falling.
Right.
And so no, I don't have time to wait. So another example is a person I know. I don't know if anyone's seen it, but there's this wonderful documentary on ESPN Plus called Banana Land, and it's about this minor league baseball team called the Savannah Bananas. And they've really kind of changed the way these teams do things. But that's another one that's currently on submission with several editors because the season's going to be over soon. The television series is going to. They're in their fourth week, I think, of 6 or 7, and so yeah, I think I always do that. I'm always open about it.
So when you say you're open about it, you just say one sentence. I've only done it one time, saying, "Hey, this is
just so you
simultaneous
know this. Yes, just so you know this is
submission."
this is on submission elsewhere, and if I hear anything, you'll be the first to know. Which you
Right.
can also use as it doesn't always work, it rarely works, but
Yeah.
you could also use as a leveraging tool down the line. Hey,
Right.
this other place wants it, but I sent it to you first, even if, and don't tell anyone I said this, but even if you're not being entirely truthful, hey, I sent this to you, but
Yeah.
but
Gotcha.
this other place wants it. But I sent it to you first, so you let me know. And
Yeah.
I've nefariously done that before, and it's worked out.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I'm
um,
always hesitant to do that. Oh God, I'm such a careful person, really.
no,
But I just have to
no,
get over that.
yeah, and especially when it comes to this kind of stuff, nonfiction,
Yeah.
I think it's different very much in the literary world, in the fiction world, but I don't have time. Most
Yeah.
importantly, I have kids to feed.
Yeah. I got you. Yeah.
I can't wait around for you. And and of course, the one thing that most editors say and appreciate is if something is timely, put it right in the subject, timely pitch.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but no, I don't. What I'll do is what I do is I usually stagger. I rarely do like a true simultaneous unless something is crazy important and timely. I'll stagger. I will send this person an email on Monday. I will send the next person an email that Thursday. I'll send the third person an email the following Monday. And then the Monday after that, I'll follow up with the first person. The Friday after that, I'll follow up with the second person. And then the third Monday, I'll
Right.
follow up with the third. So I generally don't do full blown simultaneous submissions, but there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah. And did you what was my second question? Wait, hold on. Oh, did you hear back from everybody that you sent it to?
No,
Okay.
no.
What
No,
was your
I
ratio then? What was your percentage?
probably it wasn't. I don't think it was that many that I pitched to, but probably like 3-1. But like I didn't hear back from the New Yorker because you don't ever hear back from the New Yorker.
Yeah.
Um,
Maybe you will now, right?
well, fingers crossed.
Right.
Yeah. But and that's another thing too. Like, I mean, don't pester editors. Definitely don't. And I'm not saying this to you, Allison. I'm saying this to
Oh
everybody.
yeah, no, I got you.
Don't pester editors, but also like like Don just said, like advocate for yourself, follow up. Like,
Yeah.
and I can't tell you how many times I followed up and have editors say, like, I totally and stories I've sold. I totally missed this. I'm sorry. This is great. Or I totally missed this. It's not going to work for
Yeah.
me, but I didn't see it the first time. So yeah, don't be afraid to follow. Definitely, I
Yeah,
mean, don't
yeah,
email
yeah.
anybody a dozen times a week, but we usually my window is like, again, if it's not timely, my window is like 10 days to 2 weeks.
Right. Right.
So when I pitch someone, I will immediately go to my Google Calendar, scroll forward 2 weeks from that day, and follow up with Allison Hill at
Yeah.
whatever.
Right. Yeah, because
Anyone else?
I
I'm
actually
sorry,
heard
Allison.
back from I was just gonna comment. I actually heard back from the Atlantic once, and they actually did have a meeting about my idea, but they passed on it, unfortunately.
No, and that's
Yeah.
yeah, and honestly,
And
like,
same with the Huffington Post. I actually sent the piece into the God, I can't speak. Huffington Post. God, say that quickly after 2 B's. And that was the same thing. I wrote something and then they had a meeting about it, and
No, it's sickening, but like this is such a
because you're thinking, oh my God. It's like-
yeah, it's such a business of no's that even when you get that like little bit like, hey, I read it and it was good, but it would, I had one of my first stories I sold to the New York Times. I had pitched the editor, I don't know, 12 stories before that. And the only reason I kept pitching her because I thought I was pestering her, but she kept saying like, this is good. Like keep pitching me. Like
yeah.
we're gonna get, and not everyone, most editors don't do that. But
Yeah.
even when I get a rejection back, it's like, I really connected with this character, but it's a pass. It's like,
Yeah.
sometimes it can give you that, especially when it comes in like the darkest days and you haven't sold a story in weeks or months. It gives you that little like, I'm not totally worthless.
It keeps you moving. It does.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any
Thank
questions
you.
for
Thank you
Michael?
very much.
Michael, thank you so much. By the way, Michael, I wanted to introduce you to Michaela Lawler. Michaela is our newest member of TAF. I met her in New York. And like yourself, she's an avid cyclist. So I wanted to put you guys together, and who knows what's going to happen. But cyclists meet cyclists.
Yes, and for New Yorkers, I don't know, if you're not a New Yorker, but I was a longtime New Yorker, and I still very much consider New York City my home.
Nice. I live in southwestern Connecticut. I'm about an hour north of New York City, so
Okay, yeah,
I
that's
go there
my.
a lot.
We have a 14-month-old daughter, and my wife and I joke that we're going to move back to the city the day after she moves away to college. But I love it here. I love the Triangle. I love Chapel Hill. I love it.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing this with us this evening. This was really, really interesting. Really interesting. And again, congratulations on that sale. And I hope that opened a door for you at Wired that might lead to some additional work for you there.
Well, again, this is like the most depressing part about this whole racket is, yeah, it did. And everyone there apparently loved the story. And so I pitched them another one, and now it's like in that weird like purgatory of like, so it happens with like with the New York Times. My first story there, I was like, cool, I'm in. And then it took me like 30 more pitches to get a second story there. And but yes, I hope so too. Because it was fun. And most importantly, I know this is private, but I have to give props to Zach, the editor, because he was one of those not rare, but we don't always work. He was one of those people that made my story, quantifiably significantly better. And it was just such a joy to work with him. I would love to do it again.
A good editor is a writer's best friend, and a good editor, as we know, can take good work and make it great work. And I'm really glad that worked out for you. This has been a great meeting, everyone. Michael, thank you. Jennifer, thank you so very much. Elaine, thank you for your participation. This is great fun. One of our best meetings of the year, I think, in a lot of ways. And I'm glad we had a good crowd for it. A reminder that our October meeting is going to be our first TAF pity party. And by that, what I mean is we usually talk about the good things about our careers, the sales we've made, new markets, et cetera, all of that. But as writers, we've also had negative experiences over the course of our careers. We've had bad editors, we've been screwed out of money, yada, yada, yada. We've all got stories to tell. So next month, what I want us to do is talk about that, but not just the bad part. I want to talk about the lessons learned, how you dealt with the issue that you had, and the lessons learned from that. So I'll be making a note about this on the Google group soon, but I wanted to throw this out there. And again, October will be our last meeting of 2022. We will resume again in January, always the last Wednesday of the month. And we'll be working, the board and I will be working together on getting next year's meeting guests and some TAF Talk guests as well. So I want to thank all of you for this evening. This was great. I hope that you all, it's going to be wet this weekend, so everybody stay dry, and we will get together again in 30 days.